All right, you got it. Awesome. And just to check, Scott, are you also here? I see several other committee members. So that's excellent. All right, let me just share my screen. There we go. All right, I'm going to get started. Those of you who are also members of the special committee and are dying to answer questions online or offline, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat since I don't have everyone on my screen at one time, but it looks like we have at least 3 other members. And I'll be presenting this workshop with 2 other members of the committee. So my name is Mariko Cheifetz. I use pronouns she, her, and hers, and I'm the co-moderator of the Special Committee on Per Capita Financial Sustainability that was appointed following the General Assembly in 2018. So the other co-moderator is Valerie Young, who is also on in this workshop. Great, thanks you all. And my co-presenters when they come, and they will be brilliant when they come, by the way, Scott Lumsden, who is a member of the Financial Sustainability Subcommittee, and Sarah Moore-Noakes, who is a member of the Per Capita Subcommittee, was really key overall to the drafting of the recommendations. The 2 of them were on the second writing team we had, because as you know, with 2 extra years, so much more time to make sure that we're getting our recommendations right. So I think with that, we'll go ahead. If you have questions that occur to you in the middle of me talking, feel free to drop them in the chat. If you're the kind of person who will forget, I see you. Feel free to do that. I'm going to try and get through the presentation itself since this is being recorded. We will want to make sure that we do that and then stop the recording, and then we can have ongoing conversation after that. We actually, I think, would prefer a bit more of the conversation. Hey, Scott, you're muted, sir.
Hi.
Hi. Awesome. Thanks. So I'm just going to get us going here, and Scott, I'll kick it over to you when it seems appropriate. All right.
Yep.
Now, if I can advance my slides. Great. Okay, so just as a recap, since it's been a while, in 2018, the General Assembly approved so many special committees, but one of them would be a committee to do a comprehensive resource projection analysis and summary assessment of the 6 agencies. And there were a lot of details in there that are not super important for our conversation today. And additionally, they also approved a team to focus on the per capita based system, just to see what the financial sustainability into the next term would be. Those 2 recommendations became one in February 2019. So if you recall, GA would have been in June, July of 2018. So by February 19, it was decided that we would be together. And actually the work that we did, it was very mutually informing. So I think it turned out to be really good that we were mashed into one, even if it felt a little bit unwieldy. Scott, I don't know if you think any of this is important. This timeline is also an appendix in the report. So I'm sure you're going to go read it once it's all good to go on PC Biz and all of that. But just to say, we collected a lot of data. So we really walked in just like, well, I guess we will look at the financials and we will ask questions of board members and of staff. And then Per Capita in particular did a ton of listening to mid-council leaders. And as it turns out, that was really helpful. Anything that you would add to the timeline, Scott?
No, they were pretty in-depth meetings, and we had access to staff who also were in charge of the finances. So we were able to receive answers to our questions on the spot, and they were very helpful.
Yeah. So all that to say that once we came to these recommendations, we had done quite a bit of research, just really trying to listen to what the data was telling us in the form of humans as well as spreadsheets. So very briefly, just to talk a little bit about the process of the financial sustainability, we went through, talked with folks from all of the 6 entities, with the 6 agencies of the General Assembly, and as well as ASG, which had just been formed. So our conclusions, generally speaking, around sustainability were that these 4 agencies, PPC, Board of Pensions, the Foundation, and PILP, are all self-sustaining in some way. So it's kind of on them how they do, and they don't draw on per capita. They don't need bailouts of any kind. So they are trucking along. We did have a little bit of conversation with them just about how each of them has different initiatives. There's like some programming stuff that happens, and we were just aware that even though as they're doing all of this as cooperatively as possible, sometimes it just is a lot of information coming at like the regular members of the church. So something that we noted, but they were very helpful. And then when we looked at PMA, found that most of the revenue comes from fundraising, so whatever that means, but they're able to fundraise directly, as well as investments and then sales of resources. When it came to the finances of the OGA, their primary source of income is per capita, a little bit in endowments, interest and dividends, some sales of resources, and then very little fundraising that happens that's mostly restricted to the Historical Society. So that like giving, individual giving is kind of negligible for them. It's really more about per capita. So when we looked at that, and sorry, I did not add on the 2019 and the 2020 figures, but you get the idea. Yeah. The amounts that are collected, pretty much most of what is requested from mid-councils is received. So at this point, it doesn't look from the numbers that there's an emergency. However, in conversation with what the per capita team, and they're going to go a lot more into this tomorrow in their workshop, so I definitely recommend that you go chat with them, was that there is a ton of pressure placed on mid-councils to get those receipts in. So a lot of presbyteries are struggling to submit per capita. There are different ways to understand per capita. Not every presbytery maybe deals with it the same way. And what we were hearing a lot of, and I would also like Scott to jump in here, is when we were looking in conversation with the agencies, but also listening to what was coming out of the per capita committee, we were basically hearing a lot of tension around the pressures that were coming down the pike, we would say, for mid-councils. And also hearing on the agency side as somewhat of subtext, and additionally from mid-council leaders, that maybe the structures were not set up perhaps the best to meet whatever emerging pressure there will be around funding, and that there were not a lot of structural ways for the entities to fully collaborate in terms of messages that were coming out of them. So Scott, wonder if you have anything to add here.
Yeah, I mean, I think this gets into what I think surprised me and maybe surprised our committees just a little bit, where the structure of the way the national church is put together became a real issue around a sustainability issue. And we'll get into that, I'm sure, here a little bit later.
Great. Thank you. So these were the values that emerged. Again, I think the per capita group is going to spend quite a bit more time talking a little bit on this. Something that in the financial sustainability group we had talked about was how much cooperation may or may not be predicated between the agencies upon existing relationships, or whether the structure was really set up for people to continually be revisiting all of any like shared mission, values, priorities, or if the structure was not necessarily set up that way going forward, since the idea is that we want this whole thing to last a little bit longer, not for the sake of the structure, but really for the sake of the mission, Christ's mission in the world as we in the PCUSA have been interpreting it. So here were some of the challenges. Seemed like per capita as a funding system was a challenge. Communication seemed to be a massive challenge in terms of how people understand per capita, how people even understand what the 6 agencies do. How are they different? Why does it matter to people? I'm sure you all may know this already, that people say, well, Louisville something, right? Decided this, or this came out of Louisville, not necessarily understanding the differences between the agencies, leading to a fair bit of confusion. I'm just wondering, Scott or Sarah, if you wanted to weigh in on that as well.
Sarah?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about that. As Laura mentioned earlier, one of the things that the per capita team did was many listening sessions that some of you all probably attended, where we asked a lot of questions about financial sustainability for mid-councils. We asked how money comes in, how it goes out, how it gets interpreted, lots and lots of questions. And one of the themes that we heard over and over again is that there's not clarity for many people, including some mid-council leaders, about what Louisville means, right? We just assign all the agencies, we just collectively assign them as Louisville, even though they are 6 distinct agencies with many distinct functions. And that is leading to confusion about what per capita actually pays for and what mission giving is responsible for funding, and how those 2 things interact and how they're separate. So in our discussions around sustainability and what per capita might look like in the future, that was a primary theme that came up over and over again, and that probably needs some attention, both in a structural way, but also in a communication way.
So our conclusions were, oh boy, you missed it. Okay, there it is. Just that presbyteries are really bearing the brunt of this pressure at this point, because OGA is primarily funded through per capita. They're also feeling the brunt of this particular challenge that we're looking at. There's no one cohesive mission coming out of the national agencies, and so it can be really challenging and time consuming to interpret. And then the structure of the funding and organization does not lend itself necessarily to unity. And ultimately, I think what we want to make clear is that when we were looking at this and thinking structurally, nothing is anyone's fault. We are in a rapidly changing society. You all know this, and organizations are having to shift so quickly to kind of keep up with how things are changing. And the idea is that we cannot, for instance, decide that there's one bad actor in how we're getting to any of these challenges. It's really that the system and the structure needs to be updated for how we might be able to move forward. And, oh, I should do that. I did not. Valerie. So the primary recommendation that came out of financial sustainability, but really emerged also from the findings of per capita, is that we're recommending unification of PMA and OGA. And we understand that that may sound dramatic. We already kind of recommended this in the last GA, but I'm guessing that not everyone read through everything in the last GA. A lot happened. And so this version, this updated recommendation that's coming to this General Assembly is for unification, not to think about it, but to do it. And that commission be put together to unify the two agencies, to bring them together, to have a sense of shared vision, shared mission, unity in that way. We don't anticipate that it will be an easy task if it passes. And we don't mean to minimize any of the work that would have to go into it. But sometimes we have to do hard things. And so this is what we're proposing as a committee. Scott and Sarah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I think I came into the committee, I came into the committee with very open mind. I did not know how our national church was funded. I had some idea that of a distinction between PMA and OGA, but I also had some assumptions that at every council level, we all work together and we're all kind of, working toward the same ends. The way the finances and the structure of our national church is set up when we're talking about not the 4 agencies that we excluded from this that are self-supporting, but essentially PMA and OGA, it's very clear that they're very separate organizations. And what was most surprising to me was the absolute segregation of funds, that there's no sharing. So I could understand then why OGA was very concerned about per capita and only talked about per capita, and PMA talked a lot about endowments and investments and fundraising. We could get into that a little bit more, but as we did our work, there did not seem to be a clear path or kind of an easy fix toward greater collaboration on a national mission, which was kind of a consensus mission that meant people were working together. That means when you look at the finances of an organization that you necessarily have some gaps, you have some challenges because you're also not sharing resources. So that was a surprise to me, to be very blunt with you all. I thought that there was more collaboration. So the unification idea really was born out of a review of finances and then seeing that the structure that was laid out really prevented, unfortunately, some collaboration between the two orgs. Sarah?
Yeah, I don't think I have a lot to add there, other than to just kind of, the tightest version of it is we probably have enough money for what we're trying to do, but it's very unevenly distributed, very unevenly distributed. And until we address that, nothing will change. And we aren't going to be able to address that until the agencies are working together. There have been several recommendations in previous iterations of committees and commissions recommending unification of one sort or another. It hasn't happened internally yet. And so this proposal puts forth a commission to implement, to design, implement, and follow through on it.
Yeah. I could give you an example of the inequity around funding, if you would like. Is that, Laura, are we at a good place for that?
Yeah. I was just thinking one additional point is that there may still be redundancies between the two agencies. And so unification would address that and like help clarify confusion. I think I wasn't very explicit about that. But I think at this point, I will stop the recording and then we'll continue this conversation.